Thank you very much, Randy. Let's go right back to the phone lines. We'll talk next to Robert, listening in Canada. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Hank. How you doing?
Good.
I just had a question about the 144,000 and the remnant. I'm wondering, is the 144,000, is that from your perspective, is that a literal number, or is that figurative or symbolic, or how is that?
Well, it's not a literal number. To suggest that the 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes means exactly 12,000, not 11,999 or 12,001, I think should stretch the credulity of even the most literalistic Jehovah's Witness beyond the breaking point. They have that kind of idea in their minds. But, I mean, think about it. 10 of the 12 tribes lost their national identity almost 3,000 years ago in the Assyrian exile, and the other two, Judah and Benjamin, were largely decimated 2,000 years ago by Roman hordes. Not only that, but the pattern of the Bible is to refer to the community of faith, whether Jew or Gentile, with Jewish designations. And that's why you see the New Jerusalem figuratively built on the foundation of the 12 apostles, and it's entered through 12 gates inscribed with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. And not only that, but if you read a little further in Revelation chapter 21, the walls are 12 times 12 or 144 cubits thick. And therefore, it's far more likely that 144,000 is a number that represents the 12 apostles of the Lamb multiplied by the 12 tribes of Israel times 1,000. And as such, it becomes the figurative use of a number representing true Israel as it was intended to be in perfect symmetry and providentially sealed.
Okay. So the idea that there's, the 144,000, what are we to believe when we read that in Revelation?
Well, as I said, this represents true Israel as it was intended to be. And as such, this is a number that's emblematic of the purified bride from every nation, from every tribe, from every people, from every language that will step over Jordan into a new Jerusalem prepared for her from the very foundations of the world. The 144,000 is thus the limitless great multitude of all whose names are written in the book of life and who will inherit the courts of God for all eternity. One of the things I've pointed out on this broadcast is that the 144,000 and the great multitude are not two different peoples, but they're in essence two different ways of describing the same purified bride. Literarily, the 144,000 and the great multitude are comparable to the lion and the lamb. So just as John is told about a lion and turns to see a lamb, so he is told about the 144,000 and turns to see a great multitude. And in this way, we can see that the 144,000 is to the great multitude what the lion is to the lamb. In other words, the same entity, but it's seen from two different vantage points. From one vantage point, the purified bride is numbered. From the other, she is innumerable, a great multitude that no one can count. I've written about this in the Complete Bible Answer Book, Collector's Edition. There's an entry on the 144,000. I've also written about this in my book, The Apocalypse Code. Okay.
So is your feeling that the 144,000 and we talk about or we read about the remnant, do you believe that they're the same group then, or are they two separate?
Well, I mean, when you ask that question, oftentimes the question is colored by what you've heard on radio. In fact, I was just talking at the beginning of this broadcast about traveling and listening to Christian radio, and I heard a couple of Christian broadcasters talk about this very thing with a great amount of, I think, sophistry and sensationalism, quite frankly, but not reading Scripture in light of Scripture. And so the problem is a lot of people have perceptions with respect to numbers in the book of Revelation that come more from a fertile imagination than reading Scripture in light of Scripture. If you read Scripture in light of Scripture, you see that the figurative use of the number 12 and its multiples is well established. In other words, it's not part of something that someone dreams up, but something that you get from the Bible itself. For example, the tree of life in paradise restored is said to bear 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the great presbytery in heaven is surrounded by 24 elders. You see that in, I think it's Revelation chapter 4 and also in 11 and 19. Not only that, but the figurative use of the whole number 1,000 is also common in Old Testament usage, such as God increased the number of the Israelites 1,000 times, or God keeps his covenant to 1,000 generations, or God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. So the idea of rendering this figuratively is something that comes from the Scriptures itself. And who can help but think back to Ezekiel's depiction of a man who is clothed in linen, etching a mark on the foreheads of those who have grieved and lamented over all the detestable things done in Jerusalem prior to the destruction by the Babylonians 6 centuries before Christ, or failed to realize that those who were marked were the earnest of the 144,000 sealed prior to Jerusalem's destruction in AD 70. So again, all of this is contextualized by the Bible itself. And this is the very thing that we need to do in biblical interpretation. We have to always interpret Scripture in light of Scripture. And this is particularly noteworthy with respect to the book of Revelation. Reason being that Revelation is not only an apocalypse in the sense of an unfolding, but also an apocalypse in the sense of a linguistic matrix that is drawn from the wellspring of the Old Testament literature.
Okay. So if I was to write a paper on Revelation and I wanted to, like the remnant and the 144,000, so I would be saying in the paper that they are not the same, that the number 144,000 is not a literal number. I just want to make those points clear.
No, I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses think that it's a literal number, and there are a lot of sophists and sensationalists, even in the evangelical Christian church today, who say it is a literal number. It's not, as the Jehovah's Witnesses put it, it's Jewish witnesses in their view. So the Jehovah's Witnesses have this view that the 144,000 is a literal number of tickets that go to people that get entry into heaven, and the other great crowd is an earthly class. So the 144,000 tickets have been sold. It's literally only 144,000. There's not 144,001 tickets, and therefore no one can get a ticket into heaven at this point. All those tickets have gone. But likewise, just as Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong, so are those sophists and sensationalists in the present-day church that are saying it's literally 144,000 Jewish witnesses, not Jehovah's Witnesses now, but Jewish witnesses that are those who have never been with women. They're virgins, and they're part of the remnant in the end days and all of these kinds of things. All of this is sophistry and it's sensationalism, and it really doesn't have any place in the Christian church. It's unfortunate. It sells well, but it doesn't comport well with the biblical text.
Yeah, I just figured maybe that the unit 1,000 is the biggest unit that they had back then. Like, they don't have million, you don't read about millions in the Bible, and they have 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. The unit of measurement, 1,000, to me is, I figure it's probably, it's the biggest unit of measure that they had.
Well, but I mean, it's more analogous in a lot of ways to, me stepping on a scale and saying, oh my goodness, I'll weigh a ton. I mean, that's a very common figure of speech. It's a way of speaking that's very common to us. If we've gained a couple of pounds, we say, wow, I weigh a ton. But in the same way, 1,000 was a very common usage of a whole number in a metaphorical sense. So, I mean, think about some other examples. Even if 1,000 shekels were weighed out into my hands, I would not lift my hand against the king's son. Remember that epic passage in 2 Samuel, I believe, chapter 18. Or God shows love to 1,000 generations, or better is a day in God's courts than 1,000 elsewhere. Or as I mentioned, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Do we say, okay, now I want to take that literally. That must mean that God does not own the cattle on 1,001 hills, and he owns more than the cattle on 999 hills. I mean, obviously that's absurd. It's a way of saying God owns everything. So 1,000 as a whole number is invariably used in metaphorical fashion in the whole of the biblical text. And one would certainly suppose that in apocalyptic literature, in terms of that particular genre, to take it now in a wooden literalistic sense as the Jehovah's Witnesses do, or as some Christian controversialists do, is, well, to be polite, it's just simply absurd.